after the last presentation. Thank you so much. Well, good morning, good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Brian Morales. I'm the chief of the Counter-Narcotics Branch in the U.S. Department of State's Bureau for International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Affairs. Thank you so much for registering for the Coalition Sub-Working Groups. This is the first sub-working group meeting of the first sub-working group, 1.1 for the Coalition, and we have quite an ambitious agenda ahead of us for the next 12 months. So it's a pleasure to be here with all of you today, and thank you for your interest and participation. This is Subworking Group 1.1, Manufacturing of Synthetic Drugs and Their Precursors, and I am just going to provide some administrative announcements before we start moving forward with the agenda for today. So as I alluded to, this is 1.1. This is within the Manufacturing and Trafficking Working Group. Today, we are going to have 4 consecutive meetings that will run each on the hour. So this is our first hour, 1.1. And then we will also be covering the sub-working groups under detecting threats and emerging patterns. And then tomorrow, we'll be having those for public health over a block of 3 hours. Next week, on the 25th and 26th, we will do the same meetings at the sort of inverse time zone for the Eastern group that will cover primarily the regions of Asia and the Pacific. I wanted to highlight that registration for the working groups and the sub-working groups remain open to other colleagues from governments or international organizations. You can see the links here on the slide for registration into the other languages, and we will continue to make those available to all of you. If you do need any information, I want to highlight the email address at the bottom of the screen, syntheticscoalition@state.gov. Please write to us with any questions or needs that you may have. I want to also inform that a new coalition website is under development at the moment, and the presentations from today will be recorded, but we will stop the recording right after we have finished the presentation. So the commentary period, the period of reflections and interaction will not be recorded to allow for maximum ability and comfort of the delegates to share their candid thoughts. International organizations have designated coordinators to help us in the work that we are doing today. We are very grateful for that support, and they will be providing a meeting summary, which we will then circulate among all of the delegates. I also want to announce that in the next few weeks, the Secretariat, which is comprised of the international organizations as well as the State Department team here in INL, will be sending the schedule for the meetings for the rest of the year, and we will be sending calendar invites as well for the next few months ahead of time so that everybody has those dates on their schedule. And now I want to conclude by sharing what the meeting schedule will look like. And today's session is very important because we are framing the issue. We're going to be discussing the landscape of our particular sub-working group, and also what major challenges are before us when we look at this issue. And so these are the dates for this week's meeting. Then November to February, we are going to be looking at, after understanding sort of the complex sort of dynamics, what are the best practices, the models, the intervention points, and looking very concretely at deliverables. What are very specific actions that we can take programmatically and in terms of policy to make advancement in terms of addressing the challenges that we've identified. And yes, we are also looking for commitments from countries to say we are going to be working in these areas more robustly or looking at new areas of collaboration as well. Then we will have a midterm coalition working group check-in that will be in March before the CND, and that will be at the working group level. Between April to July, we will be focused on action planning and implementation of some of the initiatives that we have identified as deliverables and commitments. And then we'll be looking at evaluation and transition that ensures sustainability of these efforts into the future. because in September, we will have our final coalition working group meeting that will wrap up the work of this group, but the efforts of the coalition will live on for years to come through the sort of expanded and intensified work that we will deliver and set up through these coalition working groups. I will finally mention that the working groups are not the only opportunity for interaction. We are also looking at sort of interacting and collaborating through the website and through other face-to-face meetings and activities and events that we will be organizing in addition to that. So with that, I want to, again, thank you all for your attention and participation today. And I want to highlight that we have 2 international organization coordinators that are supporting us in this sub-working group. One is Connor Korean from UNODC's lab section, and the other is Asma Fakhri, also from UNODC, who is a synthetic drugs coordinator. And I'd like to take a moment to see if either of them are here, and if so, to turn it over to them for just a brief introduction and welcome. I think they may not be on. So then I will turn it over then to our host for today, for our chair. Our chair is from South Africa, it's Mr. Henning Root. He's the National Chemical Monitoring Coordinator from the Directory for Priority Crime Investigations. And we are so thankful for Mr. Root for participating. Thank you so much. The floor is yours. Thank you very much. And we look forward to today's presentations. Thank you.
Brian, thanks for the introduction. As Brian said, I'm the National Chemical Monitoring Coordinator for South Africa. I'm attached to the Directorate of Priority Crime Investigation. And my duties entail making sure that Article 12 of the 1988 Convention is adhered to in South Africa. And my work is on a coordination as well as operational level. I'm very excited to be part of this coalition, and I'm looking forward to learn from everybody. I'm a firm believer of teamwork, and I think this global coalition is a wonderful initiative, and I think we will all learn from that. Without further delay, we've got 2 speakers for today. The one will be a video recording by Justice Stetti. He's the Chief Drugs Laboratory and Scientific Service Branch from the UNODC. Thereafter, Mr. Joe Buzenko, the Senior Research Chemist from the DEA, will follow. And I think without further ado, we can start the video recording of Justice Stetti. Thank you so much.
Synthetic drugs present a unique challenge to international drug control, which seeks to preserve the health of a global community. Unlike the production of plant-derived drugs, such as cocaine and heroin, which are geographically constrained, synthetic drug manufacture can occur anywhere, depending on human creativity and a few key chemicals. This fluidity makes production extremely mobile, and any country a potential source. Yet, this is not necessarily a totally new phenomenon. For over a century, international drug control has had to contend with waves of emergence of synthetic drugs. Derivatives of morphine in the 1920s, fentanyl analogs in the 1980s, and amphetamine-type stimulants in the 1990s. The 2010s marked a defining period for synthetic drugs, with the unprecedented emergence of hundreds of substances which mimic the effects of drugs harmful to human health and therefore under international control. Substances commonly referred to as new psychoactive substances have been reported in 141 countries and territories worldwide. And as of today, there are over 1,230 substances reported. For unprepared societies, the effects of these cyclical surges of synthetic drugs had severe consequences. But none of these events has been as distressing as the ongoing synthetic opioids crisis affecting mainly North America with fentanyl and its analogs, and parts of Africa, Asia, and the Middle East with tramadol. More specifically, in 2023, the World Drug Report identified that methamphetamine has emerged as a prevalent synthetic drug, with manufacture and use expanding in Southeast Asia, North America, Southwest Asia, Africa, and Europe, with seizures tripling in just 6 years. A growing number of laboratories have been detected in Central Asia, Southeast Asia, the Near and Middle East, Africa, Europe, and North America, producing a range of stimulants, depressants, and other novel dissociatives. Synthetic opioids have claimed tens of thousands of lives in North America through overdoses, the majority associated with fentanyl. Synthetic drugs have also emerged as a threat in fragile and conflict-affected areas, from Afghanistan to Lebanon, to Myanmar, to Syria, to Ukraine. In Latin America, the markets for MDMA and ketamine are growing. Africa continues to struggle with the non-medical use of tramadol. The Middle East is flooded with captagon pills, and ketamine is becoming a mainstream drug in some population groups, and seizures are hitting record levels in Southeast Asia. What makes synthetic drug manufacture so attractive? The ability to chemically synthesize immensely potent drugs at a low cost has opened doors to huge profits for organized criminal groups. Clandestine manufacturing laboratories can be set up close to markets, thus shortening the supply chains. Synthetic drugs are cheap and fast to produce. Manufacture can be more discreet and easier for traffickers to conceal. To effectively respond to this global threat, it is important to first understand the multiple phases involved in synthetic drug manufacture, recognize the challenges facing traditional supply reduction efforts to effectively detect and interrupt such manufacture. Now let's have a closer look at what qualifies as a synthetic drug. How are they manufactured? And where are the opportunities to disrupt such manufacture? It is hard to take action or talk about effective responses if we do not understand the chemistry behind synthetic drug manufacture. The capacity of forensic drug analysis laboratories to provide verified information on chemicals found within synthetic drug samples is essential. The rapid evolution of synthetic drug markets has marked a turning point for drug and precursor identification. Analyzing and identifying a large number of unknown and sometimes structurally related substances without ambiguity has become much more complex. High-potency synthetic drugs also pose a severe safety risk for anyone interacting with such drugs. We need to look at how we can strengthen the capacity of frontline officers and forensic personnel to safely handle and minimize the risk of exposure to these highly toxic substances, some of which are unknown till they are identified. Let us not forget that precursor chemicals are essential to the manufacture of synthetic drugs. If there are no precursor chemicals, there can be no synthetic drugs produced. Illicit manufacturers are circumventing the use of internationally controlled substances through minor modifications to synthesis pathways and the use of non-controlled designer precursors to make these substances. Online discussion forums, through both the clear and dark net, present hidden platforms for illicit manufacturers to exchange information and know-how on designer precursors, pre-precursors, and new synthesis pathways for the production of novel synthetic drugs. In order to effectively and safely respond to these complex challenges, it is crucial that national, regional, and international drug control efforts and policy decisions are guided by science. Secondly, international trade in drug manufacturing equipment and materials are regulated. Thirdly, collaborations with private sector and industry are strengthened, and the capacity of countries to implement international drug control scheduling decisions is enhanced. The manufacture of synthetic drugs does not require control over large agricultural areas and the local population to grow drug-related crops. Clandestine laboratories used to manufacture synthetic drugs are comparatively small in size, and the chemicals and equipment needed can be bought under the guise of licit business. This makes synthetic drugs a particularly attractive source of income for insurgents and non-state armed groups. Clandestine laboratories are discreet, often integrated in urban settings, and can be set up easily, disbanded, and relocated. This renders clandestine laboratories harder to identify, trace, and track. Their presence in urban settings makes it all the more difficult and dangerous to safely dismantle if not guided by science. How can clandestine laboratories be identified and safely dismantled? In order to identify clandestine laboratories, it is crucial to first recognize common signs of illegal activity associated with clandestine laboratories. We should be able to pinpoint typical locations for clandestine laboratories in both urban and remote settings. We should be able to understand key components of what formulates a clandestine laboratory from the chemicals and equipment needed. Another important aspect of effectively addressing synthetic drug manufacture is the disposal of chemicals used in their illicit manufacture. Seized chemicals, when not correctly identified and managed properly, can cause serious and immediate risk to human health, communities, the environment, and critical resources such as groundwater, drinking water, and agricultural land. It is therefore important that chemical disposal operations are conducted in a manner that seeks to reduce or eliminate this risk. A significant risk to drug control efforts is the potential for reintroduction or reintegration of these seized materials into the illicit drug market, often due to the lack of well-defined in-country measures for secure storage, as well as timely and efficient disposal. This is often the result of the absence of legislative provisions for pre-trial disposal of seized materials, the lack of suitably trained personnel for safely handling, transporting, and disposing of chemicals, the lack of infrastructure for safe housing of chemicals prior to disposal. It could also be due to low national forensic capacity for unambiguous identification of the chemicals, which is a prerequisite to the selection of safe disposal methods. It could also be due to the absence of in-country operational strategies and/or lack of interagency coordination in conducting these technical and often delicate operations. Quite often, ill-informed acquisition of very expensive incinerators as a quick fix solution to the disposal of seized chemicals have turned out to be unsustainable and costly. With synthetic drug manufacture, we are facing multiple challenges which require international cooperation to bridge information, capacity, and resource gaps in order to be able to address the synthetic drug problem. We need to target the supply chain as a connected whole, to improve monitoring and control measures, to be more prudent in regulating access to chemicals, and to collect data on a global scale to better understand the flows and the actors involved. Swift exchange of accurate scientific information across borders is also essential, as well as improving global capacities to keep up with developments in illicit manufacture. Ladies and gentlemen, the challenges ahead of us are immense and require international cooperation and coordination to step up global action on the challenges of synthetic drugs. This is the premise behind the global coalition. I am confident that discussions from this sub-working group over the coming 4 months will provide important insights and highlight solutions from around the world that can enhance responses to manufacturing of synthetic drugs and their precursors, a key component of a comprehensive response. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Justice Teti. That was a very insightful presentation. You've managed to capture so many facts that we can discuss afterwards. That is definitely very, very important. I'm going to ask
and we lost your
my
audio. I
apologies.
believe you
It
have
seems like the gremlins is in my microphone today. I would like to give the floor to Mr. Joe Bezenko now. He is the Senior Research Chemist of the DEA. Joe, over to you.
Thank you, everyone, for your patience as I'm dealing with technical difficulties on the new gadgets we were issued here at DEA. My name is Joe Bezenko, and I'm a research chemist with the DEA. A great deal of my work is done with chemical investigations. My specialty, or the subject matter expertise I have, is in illicit drug manufacturing. I spend half my time in the lab and half the time with investigators to try and move those forward. So the presentation I have for you today, I'm hoping will establish some context, at least from the point of view of DEA. Good. All right. So I want to thank everyone for the invitation, not only bringing DEA to the table, but to bring the chemist into the equation. And yeah, that's a bad pun. I'm sure I'm going to have more than a few to share with you. But I want to just cover some brief points with you. I know I don't have a great deal of time. I will say this: it is a change for DEA. It's a change for a lot of American law enforcement to bring chemistry out of the labs and a little more to the investigators, a little more to the policy, and a little more to the operations. And the fact that it's a little difficult to fight synthetic chemistry with with analytical chemistry. So chemists are locked up in a lab to perform the analyses, and why that's a noble effort, to be sure. It's really far down the food chain, as it were. When we're talking about synthetic drugs, we've had to release some of our chemistry expertise and broaden it from just beyond analytical chemistry into synthetic or organic chemistry. So that's what's happening in a great deal of the investigations that we're supporting with DEA, which involves other federal agencies and state and local and smaller law enforcement agencies. They've had to use their chemists for more than just analyzing suspected controlled substances. What I'm going to share with you today will not be very chemistry heavy, but it will merge between law enforcement and policy and the chemistry that's needed to support it. So it is a very, it can be a voluminous topic, which is to say, for the investigators in the United States, many, or the overwhelming majority, I would say, in my 25 years in law enforcement, there is very little chemistry education for our investigators. So for them to change speed and move solely into synthetic drug investigations, it's a challenge for them. Now, over the last few years, many of them have had to learn a lot more chemistry than they probably would have preferred to because of the nature of the job. Now they say precursors and product and yield like a chemist might, but they're not chemists, but they're having to rely on that type of information and subsequently that type of support from the chemists in DEA labs. This is where we try and pool it together to, if you will, support those synthetic drug investigations. These are the resources we have. So I'm going to state this again: the analytical chemistry that goes in our lab with our 300 analytical chemists and forensic chemists that DEA uses, a small portion of that is actually used for investigative support, which will draw in intelligence for what's being seized. Our foreign offices, DEA has liaisons in 90-something, I think 96 offices overseas. We also have the unique drug and signature profiling programs in the United States that allows us to determine provenance or synthetic route methodologies. We pool this all together so that we can support investigations, because merely saying we're going to investigate synthetic drug manufacturing it can only go so far without this chemistry support. Furthermore, it's not just something that can be taught or expressed in, say, an 8-hour workday or a 40-hour course over a week. Chemistry is consistently evolving. There are new precursors, new routes, new drugs. All of that has to go into a constant, or if you will, evolving support solution for the field, much like our IT support. would have to constantly evolve as new software and new virus and new threats are brought up. And that is something that needs to be consistently supported. Chemistry has to consistently support investigation into synthetic drug labs. So if there's a take-home note I can express to you, perhaps a little early on in the presentation, is get to know your chemists, get to have them support this. A great example of how we're supporting it, it's unique in the fact that we have a fentanyl profiling program that allows us to look at the synthetic drug that's absolutely ravaging the United States with overdose deaths. I'm sure the numbers have made their way out there into the media. More than 100,000 deaths in the United States attributed to overdoses, and many of them related to synthetic drugs such as fentanyl and methamphetamine. This program, while not able to determine the provenance of where the synthesis took place, it will tell you the precursors that are being used, the specific methods that are being used, and the variations. So there is considerable research in our laboratories for synthetic chemistry, not just research for analytical. Now, I'm going to make that division really appropriate right now, and the fact that you might have physicians or lawyers that might have different specialties. Chemistry has different specialties. Anything that goes on in a forensics lab is 99% of the time is going to be analytical chemistry, where instruments are plugged into very expensive analytical schemes and a report comes out that is used for judicial purposes. Synthetic chemistry is literally the construction of a molecule. That is done in very few labs, actually. So not only is there disparity between where the chemistry is centered in law enforcement, it is a field of chemistry that's not often used. So that's something we've come to terms with the DEA, that we've hired synthetic organic chemists to support this, because we know the analytical chemistry is still a different discipline within, if you will, the broader term of chemistry. So as you see here under the highlighted areas there, we are able to determine the purity and the synthetic route methodology used for this. We could also do this for methamphetamine. For cocaine, we can give you provenance. For heroin, with the morphine related to that and from the poppies, we can give you provenance on those as well. This is an example of how we break down the profiling program reports. That you'll notice that the Gupta is the common method for powders that we see in the United States. And the reason why I bring this up is you're going to see this chart change over time as new precursors become available and then eventually wane in their availability, either through interdiction, through control or regulation somewhere, that this will change. Furthermore, I might add, there's modifications of known routes that appear in the scientific literature. They'll modify them. So again, our synthetic organic chemists are working on those modifications so that we can determine, which exact Gupta route is being used. There's Siegfried, and of course, there's different methods that we'll use, and we will determine over time. Now, we'll see that not determined or an unknown category will eventually grow, and eventually we'll identify what that's being, what is actually being executed in that route. With that, we take investigative information, feed it back into our synthetic research, and we're able to give a clearer picture to our policymakers, to our investigators, to our regulatory side, and to our counterparts, certainly. So all of this research information is, of course, made transparent to our partners in law enforcement and science. For the tablet manufacturing, you see we start to have an unknown. We'll actually see some variations that make the tablets as opposed to the powders that we see in the United States. They could use any one of different precursors to being used, but we do see a difference in the synthetic methodology employed between powders and tablets. This is just a screenshot that we use in our lab system as we quantitate every exhibit that comes in for fentanyl and meth and many others that we see. Between 60 and 70% of the tablets that we see in the United States actually has more than the 2 milligram, which is the established fatal dose by EMCDDA, more than 2 milligrams within about 70% of the tablets that DEA sees. And mind you, we see tablets all over the country at our borders, our foreign offices. So we have a pretty good picture on what that's being seen. And what I want to point out to you is this grew over time. So fentanyl showed up, and in the ordinate over time, the tablets had a small amount of fentanyl in it on an average, and then it started to grow, and then it approached 2, which is that marker that EMCDDA established. And then now it's at 2.2 and probably going to be on 2.3 to 4 on the next one. So we do see that. And of course, this makes perfect sense, this data correlating with the number of overdose deaths that we see in the United States. So here's the synthetic drug operation model that we've identified in the DEA. Now, mind you, this isn't just chemistry. This is us going out to these clandestine laboratories. DEA actually makes a good habit of dispatching our chemists to these synthetic drug labs, and we'll actually have, if you will, boots on the ground to look at the chemicals available, to sample the various different reactions, to sample the precursors, and to establish a really good picture on what's going on. We pair that in with the research that comes from our synthesis side, and then we're able to put together, like I said, a clearer picture of what's happening. So first off, I will say this: as long as there's going to be addiction and potential for death associated with pain medication, the illicit pharmaceutical community and research community is going to continue to prod away at novel synthetic opioids. They want to find one that will kill pain, that will not necessarily, impact respiratory function, or that does not have an addictive side to it. But each time they go and produce, if you will, some sort of synthetic opioid, what do we have is we have now another challenging target that the illicit side may make use of. So there are far more novel synthetic opioids available in the literature than we're seeing today. And what I'm saying, this as a chemist, is that is something that would potentially have protracted impact, not only in the United States, but for the global community at large. These are the labs that we see. I know Justice Teddy mentioned this before. The synthetic labs that we're seeing down in Mexico, they are not using fantastic glassware. They're not using, necessarily cleanup techniques that we would see in a typical labs. It's bucket chemistry. So to further his point, not only can these multi-stage syntheses be executed in austere conditions, they're also highly improvised. Furthermore, the product that we get out of that, the fentanyl that we get out of that, has relatively few byproducts, or, if you will, impurities associated with it. At first they did, but now they've cleaned that up. So it's rather amazing that the illicit manufacturing of drugs can be done in such a crude manner and produce such a superior product. And we see this time and time again. Now, of course, I know I have colleagues up north in Canada that have a different situation. I'll leave that for them to present. But this improvisation, it tracks perfectly with the way that methamphetamine, the other scourge in the United States, was also manufactured. So this is just an example. I just took a screenshot out of one of our peer-reviewed scientific literature. The cartels, the illicit drug manufacturers, are using classically trained chemists. I'm going to say that again. They are using classically trained chemists to drive these, if you will, synthetic drug manufacturing. They may not be the ones that are arrested at clandestine laboratories, but they're the ones identifying new routes. They're the ones making modifications. They are the ones that are actually making sure that there is, if you will, continuity of operations. Should a precursor be seized? Should a lab shut down? This is their way of saying, we're going to have all of these routes available to us. And it wasn't just through Google searches, but it was using college professors. It was using folks that have graduate degrees in chemistry. That is something that I try and sell to our policymakers, to say, if you're going to investigate synthetic drug manufacturing, do realize that the folks on the other side of that, the illicit side, they are using synthetic chemists for their purposes. This is an example of a research notebook that was seized and shared with DEA from an illicit drug manufacturing lab. Now, rather than it being a lab for production, this was a research lab. And if you go through what we see here that was shared with us with our colleagues down there, this notebook, which had hundreds of pages, this is an example of the chemistry that's being done there. So when I tell our policymakers we need to have chemists more available to this, because what could this possibly mean to our investigators that don't have a chemistry background, or to our intelligence analysts that don't have a chemistry background? But it means everything to us. So as we say, a picture, has 1,000 words associated with it. Well, there's definitely a lot of commentary that can go on here between the precursors that you see here, and not only the precursors, but the reagents and solvents. They also discuss yields and the pros and cons for each method. There's a lot to be determined here. But back to, if you will, the discussion about improvisation, they think improvisation too. Well, they know that if you want phenethylamine to use in one of the routes, you can get that from chocolate. Now, I'm not saying that chocolate is a precursor for fentanyl, but it's something that's on their mind. They know to go about getting precursors from, alternative sources or from uncommon sources. But this is just an example of one note that we saw in the book that they know exactly where to, source this particular material from. So we're up against a potent adversary. So our legitimate chemical research, think of universities, pharmaceutical firms, any private research institutions. Chemistry marches on whether we like it or not. And if you understand that you get out of chemistry and after 5 years, the chemistry of synthetic organics has really changed to considerable. There's a lot that's been added every single day. So you have to keep up with it. Well, the illicit research is monitoring every bit of that because they're trained scientists as well. I'm a professor. I've been teaching for 17 years at a university, and I will say that if you don't stay on top of it, you become a little behind the times. A new textbook comes in and mentions routes you didn't know existed. So these illicit research, these researchers that are working for the cartels, these drug trafficking organizations, they are monitoring every bit of that. They monitor the patents that come out. They monitor the new papers and all the peer-reviewed journals because they're literate in it. They pass these on to the synthetic mercenary companies that we see in Asia, and they will find a restored research drug. Now, I'm going to talk about that in the next slide, but that is a drug that didn't make it to market, at least in the United States. Now, when it didn't make it to market because it either failed for safety or for efficacy, but someone decided to say, well, let's now make this available for the illicit market. And you find these firms over in Asia that are willing to cook that up or that make that available even without being prompted to do so. But it's not only that restored research drug, but it's the analogs, if you will, the variations or the manipulations that drive very closely related drugs with it. All right. That's not something that we see in the research. It's not like I can call up a journal and say, hey, this is what's going on. We end up finding it in our analytical labs. We'll end up finding it during our investigations where we have seizures on ships, or we'll find sharing of information from the ports down in Mexico and South America. So why is this precursor here? Well, what does that mean? And we'll have to identify where this is coming from. Again, since this is not openly available research, imagine your investigators having to tackle this chemistry problem without having any chemistry support. So fentanyl, its patent number, the U, I think, are Upjohn drugs, and that's from the 70s. And the nitazines, which is the latest drug we've seen, or it's the latest class actually, is from 1957. Well, the illicit synthetic opioid dawning now has created not only these restored research drugs on the top side of the bar, but beneath it, the analogs identified. And if we come back and present this later on, say next year or say in March or April, there may very well be another class in there that we can discuss intelligently about. And again, this all goes back to the fact that that potency breeds profit. And from profit, you're going to get peril. And as Justice Teddy mentioned, this profitability makes it very attractive, even in markets that say did not have, say, a synthetic opioid issue. Back to the diagram there, the illicit research is also identifying, the novel precursors. They'll identify items from literature, but like we said with Gupta, then they can find, well, let's find some newly developed precursors. This newly developed precursors, again, gives us a new challenge to identify it in our labs, a new challenge to interdict it. And of course, it gives us a different profile for our programs. All of that, we want to feed back to our policymakers, our intelligence officers, and to our investigators. So again, it requires more chemistry, and that'll make its way into our clandestine laboratories. And again, not available in open research. We have to figure that out on our own. So chemistry is constantly not only evolving, but every day it's something else we have to delve into the literature for. We have to go back into our laboratory and test viability of a new precursor that we suspect is being used. And that can't be done on paper. This is something we actually do in a laboratory. An example of what we do, so we try and move our chemists a little further up the food chain. By doing so, we'll look at these websites. We'll see what they're offering. Sometimes in this case, you're seeing a nitazine. This is one of them, protonitazine, that's being offered. Definitely you can see that, but you definitely see the new precursors evolving there. This allows us to identify what the latest precursor might be. This allows us to identify where it might be going, the next drug or the next batch of precursors.
Joe, sorry to interrupt. We're running out of time.
Okay.
I'm sorry to have to do it to you. This is
let me move on to the
nice presentation.
All right. Am I out, or do I have 1 moment?
We've got about 5 minutes left, but we still need to have a small discussion regarding your presentation and Justice Chetty's.
Okay. Well, then I tell you what. Then Get your chemist involved. It's going to be a difficult ride ahead. Don't wait for it to happen. And we're happy to share this DEA to our colleagues out there. And thank you, Henning. Sorry, apologies for going over time. I think I got tracked off. So I'm going to stop the share and I'll hand it back to you, good sir.